Okay, so hi guys, I'm Courtney from Stateless. Maybe some of you know me by now. I'm a product development and production manager. Stateless is an outsourced design, development, and production team servicing brands small and large across the globe. You can check out our Makers Row page. We have it linked there. We have a partnership with Makers Row and now Embark Live. You can find our product team on Makers Row and our branding team on Embark Live. Embark Live, for those who aren't familiar, it's an online community that connects entrepreneurs and small businesses to business category experts. Please make sure to sign up. If you go to Makers Row, that's where you're looking to be connected with people who can help you make the product. And on Embark Live, it's where you can be connected with people and businesses who can help you do all the other aspects of your fashion business. Today, we're going to talk about a two-part series. It's going to be a design and developing for e-commerce today. And then next Friday, I'm going to talk about designing and developing for wholesale. I do urge everybody who's interested in doing either one to watch both because you'll learn the differences and it'll help you solidify your decision-making on whether you want to do just direct-to-consumer e-commerce business or you want to eventually build in room for wholesale. So feel free to ask questions throughout. I'm going to stop and answer, but please go for it. For e-commerce, direct-to-consumer or DTC is what we call it. It's a fairly new aspect of the retail industry. Before e-commerce, the only companies who could go direct-to-consumer were brick-and-mortar companies like The Gap. So with the accessibility, of websites, e-commerce has been the fastest growing sector of the retail market for over a decade. There are very few companies in 2020 who do not have an internet presence with e-commerce, but only some companies sell exclusively online. Today, that's what we're going to talk about is companies who sell exclusively online. However, most brands, they still wholesale their goods to other retailers as well as having their product on their own direct-to-consumer site. So with that said, like I said, ask away. I forgot to open the chat to make sure. There it is. Okay. So before you start your line, you always need to identify what your sales model is going to be at the outset. And this is because each sales model requires different practices. The sales model I'm talking about is either e-commerce or wholesale. In this segment, we're going to talk about aspects of your business that are impacted by an e-commerce sales model. And these are calendar. Before you start your brand, you want to establish your sales model because then you need to determine from your sales model, you'll be determining your timeline. I've said it every single live we've done so far, but I'll say it again. Calendar is very important. With e-commerce, your deliveries can be more flexible than when you sell wholesale, but you still want to have product throughout the year's milestones for things like fall shopping, the holidays, resort, vacation, new clothes for spring and summer. All clothing is seasonal. There is some stuff that works year round, but you just want to make sure that you've got product in a timely manner because of the seasonality of apparel. Even if you offer something like underwear, you do want to capture repeat customers. So you need to have an assortment of fresh items on your site as well as evergreen product. And there's a cadence of when all of this should be released. So how do calendars work? The reason that I am talking about this now is because I saw a strong interest in calendar on the last live I did. So I thought I'd focus here on that because it's a big opaque thing for people who are new to the industry. So calendars are built backwards from delivery dates. Generally, your development takes 6 to 9 months at minimum, but new brands in particular can take up to a full year from start to final sample. Just the development part could take a whole year. Listen to that again. It could take a whole year, just the samples. Usually you can do it in 6 to 9 months. However, production's a lot faster. It usually goes just about 6 to 8 weeks. These lead times right now that I'm talking about are based on manufacturing in the US and using stock fabrics. If you have custom materials, you will need to begin raw material ordering an additional 6 to 8 weeks prior to starting production. So before you can assort your line and begin designing, you need to determine what season you're developing for. I'm going to give you now the start and finish dates of each season so you can determine what season you should design for. I also see a question, recommendations for getting your brand in front of more potential customers and how much should you be spent on marketing and promotion. I will touch on that in the fourth segment of this piece. I'm a product person, so I don't have as many recommendations as my branding team or a salesperson would have, but I have experience that I will share. Hey, sorry, this is my dog. So you guys have met Lizzie before. So anyway, the fall e-commerce calendar. You start designing the fall the year before. So that means you would start somewhere between September 1 and no later than November 1st. Your samples need to be fit approved the first half of May. You can see my previous talks for the development process, but quickly, just to remind you, you need to fit up to 3 times before your samples are fit approved, which is why the development process can take 6 to 9 months. So once you have your fit approved samples the first half of May, you're going to do your shoot and all of that, but your factory, you have to remember, you need the samples to shoot and get your marketing assets, but your factory needs the samples on hand to use as references. You should never have production going without a factory on hand, a sample on hand at the factory, I should say. So that's why, even though what I'm about to tell you is that you should start your production June 15th, you want to have your samples finished May 15th. So you take a month to use the samples, shoot them, and then you can give them to the laborers who need them for reference. So you start your production, your fabric POs, and your trim ordering, as well as sending that order to the factory so that they know what's coming to them by June 15th if you want an August delivery, and by July 15th if you want a September delivery. Okay, so then we've got the holidays e-commerce calendar. You start your designs during the winter the year before. So anywhere between November 1 and no later than January 1st. Samples need to be fit approved the second half of July. And then your production PO for fabrics and trim ordering needs to start in October or no later, really, I would say actually August 15th is what you'd want to do for a November delivery. You want to start September 15th. So again, you want your samples done in July, even though you're starting production in August, so that you have time to shoot your samples and then give them, because a lot of times during the development process, you don't have your hands on your samples. The people who are working on your stuff need your samples. Okay, so just to recap that, if you want an October delivery, you start in August. And if you want a November delivery, you start production in September. But I will say the holiday season, it would be best to start August 1st instead of those deliveries because, Thanksgiving and the holiday rush really starts to set in and messes with the workflow of everybody. Okay, so next we've got spring e-commerce calendar. You start your design for spring the year before, ideally March and no later than April. Your samples need to be fit approved early November. When you want to have a February delivery, you need to start production in November. And if you want to have a March delivery, you need to start your production in early January. Again, one thing to note is that between Thanksgiving and New Year's, things slow down. Moving on to the summer e-commerce calendar. I will say it depends on your market. Summer doesn't always, it's not always the biggest season. The first 3 I mentioned are really big seasons. So you might want to just have either you change your marketing strategy and anything that's left over from spring, you kind of shoot it with a summer vibe from your production that you already have on hand. You just kind of reassort your web page. You bring all of the things that, have been sold out. You take those off and you bring other things that are cool that you are offering up to the top and you start pushing those products. But if you do want to have a true summer delivery, it tends to be smaller, and you should start design the summer before. So you see a pattern here. You usually start thinking about it the year before in the proper season. And you start, really working on the product, ideally in May and no later than early July. Samples need to be fit approved by the end of February. And then for a May delivery, you want to start production March 15th. And for a June delivery, you want to start production April 15th. Now these are, you can see there's a buffer. So this is because in this industry, there's a lot of hands, there's a lot of people to manage, and there's a lot of decision making that you have to do on your part. So we try to buffer, and try as you might, you want to pass something, but you want to start your summer design by May, but something happens, you were focused on, you had a good problem, your sales from spring were so good that you were focusing on that, and you didn't start it until June. It's not ideal, but it can be done. And with e-commerce, you have much more flexibility with that. You can go all the way until kind of like July 1, before you're in trouble and won't hit your market deliveries. So I don't see any questions so far, but please feel free to ask away. I heard a lot of people in our last live really wanted to talk about that calendar. So feel free to, I now see you can go to Facebook and watch these rewatch these lives. Sorry, my dog. You can rewatch these lives. So you can go and take notes, write that down, pin it on your wall, commit it to memory. It never changes. Okay. So now that you have your season that you're designing for, it's time to assort your line. Generally speaking, if you want to sell wholesale, it's best to offer at least 7 styles in a variety of colors. But some wholesale brands offer an upwards of like 20 styles in a variety of colors because they want to gain business from several stores and need to cater to multiple markets. But for e-commerce, on the other hand, you can totally launch with 1 style and 1 color if you want to. I mean, that's usually easier for brands like, like Quip, the toothbrush company. It's a lot easier for them to do that than for an apparel brand, but in theory, you could do this. But I do want to say that no matter if you want to like launch with 1 style, you're definitely going to want to offer more product in the future. And because of how intense and laborious the development process is, it's gonna you might as well do 4 styles at once. Even if you don't produce them until later, you should be developing. It's kind of a waste of time to develop 1 style and then like 3 months later start another style. In my professional opinion, I think that it's no different between doing 1 style and 4. Obviously it takes more money, but you could, if you plan on doing it anyway, it's work smarter, not harder. And you can take your fit proof samples and you don't have to produce them right away. So that's my little 2 cents there. So anyway, but for most of us, we do want to begin with more than 1 product anyway. So you want to think about your product page and how it will look. If you only have a few things, it might be hard to gain customer allegiance. So in my opinion, I still think you should start with about 4 styles. In a few colors per style. So that way you have the 4 styles and it looks like you have a breadth of options on your website. You want your assortment to cater to a variety of customers. So you do want to put some options in there. And plus you want repeat customers. So you'll want to offer a few things. Reason evergreen means that it's like seasonless. It's something that you can go to that company's website for and buy no matter what time of year it is. There could be one where it's like you've got 1 evergreen thing for spring and 1 evergreen thing for spring and summer and 1 evergreen thing for fall and winter. But that way, sometimes especially for like website brands, e-com brands, people take a while to pull the trigger and decide to buy. So if you have that thing that they've been looking at and then they're like, oh, okay, finally, I'm going to go and get that. I want to get that camisole that I've been looking at. This is especially helpful for higher price brands too, because sometimes people have to really think about it or they have to save for it or wait for like, their tax refund or something, time to splurge. So you want to have product that comes in and out, that comes in season and then is gone. But it's great to have 1 evergreen product per season. Okay, I see a question. Oh, great. Thank you for the calendar. So glad. Okay, so I hope you guys are still here. I can't ever see who's here with me. It's not like Instagram Live where I can see you guys. So when you don't ask questions, I feel like I'm talking to a wall, but I'm hoping that this is helpful and that we'll keep going. So, okay. So once you've established your assortment, you want to proceed with design and development. I've already discussed those in previous lives, and you can reference the Maker's Row on Facebook. So we won't go into it here, but we haven't talked about pricing much, which differs greatly between e-commerce and wholesale models. So yes, you want to do your design and development after you've established your assortment, but you can't design and develop without thinking about your pricing. So I want to talk about that. Oh, thank you. You're here. Great. Thanks. So, okay. You want to ensure that whatever prices you plan to sell your product at are realistic. And you want to ensure that before you even, go into making samples. This is hard for new brands to do. And that's because, you don't have a frame of reference. For me, I can kind of cost estimate. You can show me a design and I'll say, like, this shirt is complicated. You cannot get this done made in US for cheap. And we could do it in New York and it would be very expensive. This work, really, you'd have to make very few pieces so that you could keep up with the production because it's a lot. So for example, though, I could look at it and I would say, okay, the fabric on this, if that's real silk, okay, that's going to be $17 a yard. It's going to need about 2 yards. Okay, so let's just round that up to $40 in materials. The labor, it's probably going to be a lot, maybe $60 just because of all of this. Usually a shirt, made in USA is anywhere between a collared shirt like this, anywhere between 20 and upwards of 100. So, but I know that stuff. I can name that off the top of my head, and it's still not accurate, but I know the yields. I know about how much fabrics cost. If I'm thinking, I can't think of a factory who could do this. This is really complicated. But we could ask around, and then I know that factory's price. So I can help with cost estimates. But for somebody in your position where you're new to the industry, making that up is going to be really hard. So, and again, even when you do come to Stateless, if you tell us, oh, I have a tracksuit, we don't know if it's going to be, expensive fleece, heavy fleece, you want prints all over it. It's really hard to come up with cost estimates. So this is a really important conversation to have. Oh, thank you. Sorry I have her here. I just would rather her be on my dog on my lap than for her to be like crying off screen. So anyway, okay. So labor and materials are what determine your costs. I'm not sure how people who are new to the industry do this, or if they just do it later, and then they just learn the hard way that their product sometimes exceeds what their target costs are. I'm really not sure because I've never been in that position. But because of this, I would suggest that you hire somebody to help you with this part. You could go in yourself. You could, in theory, you could take your designs and you could go to a factory and you could say, how much does this cost? You could source the materials and say, how much does this fabric cost? And you could come up with a relatively okay cost estimate. You're going to want to do that before you proceed, because where you making in New York versus making in Los Angeles, two different ball games. New York is very expensive, but the kinds of things, you could get like a fur collar, beautiful, like wool trench coat made impeccably here in Los Angeles, but it's going to be slow. They're going to be late. They're going to complain the whole time. They're going to probably come to you later and tell you that actually the price they quoted you was wrong, and they're going to charge you just as much as they would have charged you in New York anyway. So you might as well do it in New York. These kinds of things. That's why it would be helpful in this place. If you're trying to do some of it on your own, still, there's times where it's really important to rely on a professional to guide you and in making sure that you're making product that fits your cost. Your target retail price is helpful. So anyway, I'm still going to just give you how it works. I would suggest hiring somebody, but anyway. Okay, so for e-commerce brands who do not sell wholesale, your pricing model is as follows. So you take your cost of goods, the corporate speak, we call it COGS. That should be multiplied by at least 2.2 to 2.5 times. So if your hard cost for a dress is $65, your retail price should be somewhere between $143 and $163 for e-com. You can include shipping from the factory into your cost, but you should never include extra packaging that gets sent out with e-commerce orders. That would be like, your branded box or tissues. You do include your labels and your hang tags in your garment price, but the marketing packaging is not included in your cost of goods. So Nicole, you're asking about the production price. To calculate your cost of goods, it's fairly complicated. We make charts as part of our production management service at Stateless, and I'm personally an Excel nerd, so this complicated stuff is a little easier for me. But how you calculate your cost of goods is as follows. Okay, I'm going to do it slow so you can take notes. You take your fabric cost and you multiply it times your yield. The yield is how much fabric that garment consumes. That you get from your pattern maker or a factory. And again, if there's several fabrics, if this had a different fabric on the collar, you would take that cost and you'd multiply it by this yield. And then the rest of the shirt has, 1.6 yards, and you multiply that by the cost. So that's your fabric costs. You do the same thing for your trim. I've got buttons here. I think there's 12 buttons on this shirt. 12 times 11 cents. Those are your trim costs. Plus then your label is, let's say, 75 cents a piece. Your hang tag, they're very expensive. If you're an e-commerce brand, you don't need a hang tag. People just throw it away. Hang tags were made for retail. It's for putting a price tag on it. If you want to be eco, there's other ways to get branding in. You can make cool tissue paper. You can, put stickers on the packaging. I personally believe that if you're solely e-com, you do not need a hang tag. But anyway, hang tags are more expensive. So you add like $1.50, say. Okay, so those are your material costs. The fabrics and trims, their cost times the yield is your material costs. But then you have to take in the labor cost, and that comes from the factory. That includes cutting, sewing, printing, finishing, anything like that. You add the material costs plus your labor costs and put that together, and those are your COGS. Again, what I kept saying about, I don't know how somebody does that in advance without knowing pricing, it's going to be hard. But if you want to be flexible, another way, if you don't hire somebody to do something like this up front, be flexible with what you want your price point to be. We just recently met a client who, she said she wanted to sell something at $100, but we wanted to print on it, and it was, we were making it in US, and with all the details, we explained to the brand owner that it's more realistic to sell it at like $150, and she was fine with that. That's another way for you to get around not knowing how to do kind of upfront estimates for your COGS. But anyway, once you have your cost of goods, that's when you multiply it by your 2.2 or 2.5% times so that you can get your markup. I'm going to look at some questions before I go on. I won't, how much would you charge for, to get opinion on pricing? I don't quote, I'm just the production manager and product developer. I don't know. But you can find Stateless on Makers Row and somebody will answer that for you. So yes, I'm talking about production pricing right now. Good point, Nicole. Your sampling prices are a lot more than that, but you want to make sure from the outset, if you come in and say that you want to make a $40 sweatshirt, but you want this like beautiful way, looking at like this, who sells their sweatshirts for $80, right away we're going to say we don't have a factory for you, because everything is informed by your target retail price. If you want to make that in Los Angeles, you're going to have to make 300, 600 per style, per color to hit that price. So there's a strategy, and that's why I'm talking about costing right now. The easiest way, if you don't know, is to be flexible. Say, look at what you want, look at where you want to make it and how many units you want to make, and let the information guide you as to how much you should sell it for. But sometimes people are like, no, the reason I'm starting this brand is because I don't want to make $1,200 leather jackets. I want to make $600 leather jackets. And if that's the case, then we have to really engineer the materials and the labor we're using, and you're going to have to determine how many pieces you have to make in production in order to hit that price. So when you say New York, do you mean NYC, Long Island, or Brooklyn? I mean, you're right, distinction. The Manhattan Garment District is more expensive than making in Long Island City or Brooklyn. We don't really work with a lot of garment factories on Long Island itself. There are some factories in Jersey, but for the most part, just the New York metro area, it's going to be more expensive than making in Los Angeles. There's factories in Chicago, there's factories in Kentucky, and just look at the rent and you can kind of gauge, who's going to be more expensive and where. So yes, to confirm, I'm not talking about sample pricing right now. I'm trying to have you identify your prices should be based on the target retail cost you want. Samples are always about 3 times more expensive than your production price. Okay, so a big note here is that your markup does not allow for e-commerce. The markup I just told you, 2.2 or 2.5 times, that does not allow for wholesale at all. So if you even have the slightest inkling that you want to do wholesale, even in 10 years from now, it would be better to build a wholesale markup into your retail price from the start of your company. And that's because 2.2, if you wanted to sell to somebody, you're not going to be able to do it without selling it at cost. Okay, so the advent of e-commerce brands only really shook the industry because it makes things appear as if it's almost half the price. So, because basically, if you do wholesale, that same $65 dress, I have to take 65, I have to multiply it by 2.2 to get my wholesale price, and then I multiply it by another 2.2 to get my retail price. So it's more than double the cost. So brands like Everlane, things like that, they made it look like they were like undercutting equal quality products, and it's because they were able to take a lower markup because they only have themselves to pay. So as an e-commerce brand, you have that same advantage. But I will just mention, this is my personal opinion, you might still want to take more like a ×3 markup or a ×4 markup, because a couple things. When you first start, you're always paying a surcharge. So you're going to be paying extra for everything. And as you grow, you never know. You may want to do wholesale, or at least a partnership. Maybe a really cool influencer wants to do something with you, and you wouldn't be able to afford it if you only did a 2.2, 2.5 markup. But more importantly, the consumer perception of value. If you offer a good quality product that's half the price, some people might think that that actually means that the quality is lower. And on the converse, some people might not be able to afford the expensive brand, so your brand is doing them a service. So that's just up to you. Another reason I suggest considering a larger margin built in is because you never know who's going to ask you to do a collaboration, and you'll want to be able to do that. Last reason is that it keeps the consumer's expectations of what things should cost realistic, and it helps the overall health of the fashion industry as a whole. Okay, but with that said, on the flip side, when you first launch, your costs will be higher than, like I said, than they ever are going to be again, because you're paying all these surcharges. So, in the manufacturing industry, the more you make, the less expensive things get. So if your COGS are a little high for your target retail pricing to start, a lot of brands, truth be told, a lot of brands could take a margin hit. They actually take less than 2.2 markup, just so that they can hit that target price. But they know, when they grow, right now 50 units, but when you make 150 units, your price is going to hit that 2.2 markup, so you can afford to launch with a lower margin to start. Now that you hear me say that, it might sound impossible to ever take a higher margin, but I'm just trying to outline all of the scenarios that there are for you. And just so you know, like realistically, most e-com brands end up launching with lower margins, but you want to make sure that when you are doing that, that you're not just saying like, oh, okay, so, but I don't want my $65 dress, I don't want it to be $143. I want it to be $90. If your COGS are never going to get to a place where a $90 dress gives you a 2.2 margin, you're never going to make money. So you can't just like willy-nilly decide your pricing. Big point. Okay, so I'm going to look at a couple more questions here. Okay, given recent market dips in the fashion industry, J. Crew, Neiman's going bankrupt, what are your thoughts about entering the market now during such intense volatility? Is e-commerce more or less immune to disasters like COVID? It's a really good question. I think that what I'm seeing is that, I subscribe to WWD and like the industry news, and huge corporations are suffering. But I am in the fashion industry, and I have a bunch of friends who have small brands, and we are thriving. Consumers are changing. COVID already kind of affected that. We weren't able to go to the mall. But in general, we knew that people were online shopping more so than ever before. People do Instagram shopping, that's been going on for quite a while. And, when you have an overhead of a store or when you're doing wholesale, you have to pay a showroom to sell your stuff. You have there's a lot of overhead in the fashion business. So, if you can keep your team lean, like, it's another advantage of working with Stateless is that you outsource us. You're not responsible for someone's salary every day. If you keep your team lean and you do the work yourself as much as you can, on the parts that, don't require a professional to help you, you can do well and you can survive a month of no sales. Right now, I mean, this week and last, most people haven't been trying to push their product, because of the political climate, and small businesses can afford that, especially an e-commerce brand. So I don't think it's dangerous to enter the market now. I think that what you want to do is make sure that the product you're offering, there's a reason to make it, so that there's a reason to buy it, because you definitely don't want to just saturate the market with more of the stuff you're already seeing out there. Make sure that you're doing something unique. Okay. I'm starting a new business to sell online only. What do you suggest would be a good starting point in terms of number of designs I should offer? A minimum capsule collection. I think a minimum is 4 pieces. You can offer several colors across those 4 styles, but 5, 6, here's the number game that we usually use. I don't know where I got this from, but this has been the numbers that we do my whole career. 4 styles, 7 styles, a dozen styles, 11 or a dozen styles, 14, and then somewhere around 20. Those are the increments. And you want to offer, some things are just so standout you don't offer it in multiple colors. I'm sorry, they're doing construction, New York City. Some things you only want to offer in one color, but most things you want to offer in at least 2 to 3 colors. So even if you only do 4 styles, you're offering a good range of product. Okay. I'm sorry. I think you mentioned this, but I'd like to clarify. Is the 2.2 or 2.5 the wholesale markup, and then add another 2.2 to get the retail price? If you're only doing e-commerce, you take your COGS and you mark it up by 2.2 or 2.5 times. If you're doing wholesale, you do your COGS, your wholesale price is the 2.2 or 2.5, and then your retail price is another markup of 2.2 times 2 or 2.5. Again, that's why brands like Everlane were successful in the beginning. Not a lot of e-commerce brands were out there. They were undercutting, Gap. They still take those wholesale margins, even though they're a retailer, because they have brick and mortar and they have a huge corporate office to sustain. So they were taking really high markups. Everlane came in, they were essentially the same product and cutting that price in half. So that's why e-commerce, that's why the consumer thinks that they can get cheaper things now, in part because of mass producing like H&M, and then now because of e-commerce brands not having to mark it up as high as wholesale brands have to. Okay, so where was I? I have my little cheat sheet. So we talked about COGS, and I admitted to you guys that most new brands take a low margin to start, and that's because of surcharges. So next I want to talk about why the deliveries and the calendar are so important. The whole point of having a fashion brand is to sell product. Any other, and in order to sell your product, you need to have it on hand at certain times of the year. This is the point. There are some people, there's, people who have family money who do this, as a creative expression, but even eventually everybody, the fashion industry is a commercial industry. It's not just about having fun and making things you want to sell. So this whole segment has been about the kind of the back end theory of how you need to run your business and model your business and set yourself up to have a successful e-commerce business. Okay, so with that said, at Stateless, we build a time and action calendar that outlines every single detail of the project with corresponding dates to ensure the target delivery dates are realistic and they're met. The hardest thing to do for new fashion brands is to get on calendar. This is so important though. So I've said this every single live if you've been tuning in. The calendar is hard. It's a struggle. It's a struggle for even people who have been doing this for decades, like me. If you're new to the industry and you don't have somebody working with you who knows how to stay on calendar, it's going to be tough. You can be gentle on yourself. That's why that calendar I gave you earlier, start earlier. It's never been bad to be early, you know. But you know, it's really helpful to have somebody on your side who knows how to whip you into shape, because this calendar is no joke. So the reason that the calendar is hard to manage is because there's a number of deliverables to manage. If you saw one of our time and action calendars, it's like a spreadsheet full of, there's so many action items on that thing, and that's like 6 people that you have to manage. And my role at Stateless and my role in the industry as being a product developer, during the sampling phase, we're calling fabric vendors, emailing them, sending orders. You know, we're taking the meeting with the brand owner who says, okay, these are the fabrics that I want on these designs. Okay, we take that information, we put it in the bill of materials, and we're going and we're managing all this stuff. It takes time. And that's not even like the making, you know, it's just the organizing of all the hands. So that plays a huge role in things. And so if you lose, and you know, we're all humans, you might take 3 days to respond to an email because you're backed up on other stuff. Those 3 days equals 6 days of a production lead time slide. You know, a vendor said that they're going to get you their sample by last Friday, and they don't because, you know, something happened, the machine broke and they had to fix it, or, you know, they had too many big orders at once. You didn't tell them in time that you were going to drop off an order, so they didn't have time for you, so they're squeezing you in. All kinds of reasons that the calendar slides, and it's not just you, and it's not any one person's fault. It's the way that there's so many moving parts in this process. It's inherent in the process. So you know, and the other thing is being new to the industry, the decision-making time on your end, sometimes you might need time. I recommend you take the time. If you look at a sketch, look at it, really think about it. Say, is that shoulder seam how I want it? Let me just ask them. Let's confirm that the details that I want are really being communicated in this sketch. Take your time answering those details, because you'll be happier with your product in the long run. But again, anytime you lose time, it causes a ripple effect in the system, and 3 days equals 6 days, a week equals 2 weeks. So the calendar I gave you guys before does have buffers in it here and there, but even with those buffers, the calendar is rigorous. So as I've said before, the development and production calendars are built backwards from production delivery dates. But really, it's the sales milestones that drive those delivery dates. So it's important to identify what those milestones to now talk about them in the holiday or the U.S. holidays, like, you know, Valentine's Day, Black Friday, the Christmas season, Mother's Day, Father's Day, 4th of July even, right? But you can also identify other milestones that are brand appropriate for you, like Earth Day or festival season. I mean, right now we don't have festival season, but I'm still in the mood to shop for new clothes because the weather's getting warmer. So these deliveries are still relevant. And likewise, when fall hits, it's like the new year of fashion. Fall is the biggest season for fashion. Even adults do like back to school shopping, basically. On the other hand, you also want to make sure that you do not have lots of product, like new product on hand when other people are doing sales. After the holidays, Labor Day, Memorial Day, end of season, etc. I want to point out something about sales though. Big retailers tend to have massive sales, and they've built that into their business model. They do price slashing that's built into their structure. That is why we do a 2.2 markup versus marking it up just 2 times. When you have a 2.2 markup, you can afford to give 20% off to your employees, and you know, because you're still getting your 2 times markup. So even if you sell it at 50% off, you know, you're not losing money. So that's why at least 2.2, but, you know, again, new brands, a lot of times, especially e-commerce brands, they'll end up taking like a 1.8 margin markup to start. I want to mention though, that as an independent brand, you do not have to participate in this type of price slashing, but you do want to eventually sell through and be low on inventory when those others are doing the price slashing and marking down, because you want to be keeping up with the industry. So now I'm going to answer a couple questions. Let's see. So I've been working with a pattern maker manufacturing who works with startups. Since I am new to the industry, I'm getting orders here and there, which are cause me to pay sample prices for an actual order. Oof. It's a rough place to be in. Also, I have designs on my website and I can no longer get the fabric. I have decided no longer to deal with the fabric jobbers. What is the best way to handle individual orders? I do have inventory on hand that I need to sell. And that is a different story. So that's a hard one. Never work with jobbers unless you are happy to make something be a small production run. I gotta hurry up because I always take way too long. So I'm almost done with this, but I'll answer your questions. I would not recommend, unless you are a sewer yourself or you have a pattern maker and sewer who's giving you a good price. If you want to make a limited edition version of something, go ahead. Buy fabric from a jobber. If it's built into your sales model, in LA, I'll share you guys one vendor secret. There's a place called Rag Finders. It's amazing. It's a gigantic building full of fabrics that they've bought from other companies. It's like a fabric graveyard, and it feels so good to, if you need 50 yards of French terry because you're running a small order of a sweatshirt, you can go and buy that there, and it's saving it from the landfill. You're getting an okay price, but you're never going to get that fabric again. You just have to be okay with that. If you want something that is orderable, if you want to do evergreen product, you need to work with wholesale fabric vendors. End of story. It's going to be really hard for you if you don't sit on inventory, you're going to be paying surcharge prices, but that's an option you can take. Like brands who take the margin hit in their first season, or their first 3 years sometimes, really, you could be paying sample prices for something just because you want to keep the business going. But the idea is that you should be having inventory. And it's hard because the things that are selling, it sounds like you don't have inventory of, and then the things that aren't selling, you do have inventory of. Bummer. You'll learn, and first recommendation is to work with wholesalers. Look up fabric shows to attend. Thank you, Isabel. Okay, question. Courtney, I missed what your introduction and what's the name of the company. I work with Stateless. We're here in New York. There's a little link, makersrow.com/stateless. You can find us there. Okay, so now I'm going to finish. Last thing I want to say is that as an e-commerce brand, you don't stand as much to lose if you don't hit your delivery dates as brands who do wholesale. No one is counting on your inventory coming in except your own company, and you don't have market week to hit, your sample finishing dates. And you can certainly get creative with selling most product any time of the year. Obviously, there's if you make a faux fur jacket, you're going to have to hide it put it away, take it off your website, for half a year, and you can get creative, so don't beat yourself up if you don't make it on calendar to a T the first few seasons. Almost nobody does. But try your best to remember that the point of having a fashion brand is to make sales. And the only way you're going to make sales is if you keep up with the market by staying on calendar. And the only way you're going to make money is if you set up your retail prices properly. So that's why I talked about these 4 items in this segment, because, I hope that it's really helpful for you, so that you can make sure that there's strategy behind how you're developing. Make sure to sign up for Embark Live and check out Stateless's page on Makers Row. And I hope to see you next Friday at the same time to talk about designing and developing for wholesale. It'll be complimentary, and I do recommend, I'm going to say it again, I recommend that even if you're already decided on what you're going to do, listen to what the difference is with wholesale so that you can, just know how the whole industry works so that you can make an educated decision on any moves in your business moving forward. Okay, I see. What was the name of the fabric place? Rag Finder. I never give out. That's a faux pas, but you could happen to be driving by and see that place, and you have to have a wholesale license, so you can't just walk in. It's not a store. He's actually quite rude. He's a jobber, but it's huge. And you'll be able to find, if you want to do limited runs, you can get fabric there. But That is not a sustainable business practice. I highly recommend that you only do that for special items, and you make sure to work with wholesale vendors. Okay? Because otherwise you're going to be in a situation like Deborah Ann, where she can't get her fabric again, and your customer wants what's familiar. So anyway, thank you guys so much. I hope to see you next Friday.